If you would, please take your seats and we'll get started. Good morning. Thank you. Okay. Yes. We're waiting a few more seconds till some other people get back in the room. We'll be right with you. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training. My name is Kirk Cordell, and I'm the Executive Director here at NCPTT, and I want to welcome you to a preservation conversation with Senator Mary Landrieu, inspired by Laura Hudson. I'm sorry to say, for those of you who have not heard the news yet, that Senator Landrieu had a change in schedule, and she will not be joining us this morning. However, I would like to welcome Donald Cravens, who's her Chief of Staff, and also Tari Bradford, who's her Deputy State Coordinator, who are both with us today. And Don will be speaking on her behalf today. So we're glad to still be able to have a connection with the Senator this morning, and thank her for sending her staff to join us today. I'd like to start out by thanking our co-sponsors and some of the people that helped get this meeting together. First of all, I'd like to recognize representatives here from the National Parks Conservation Association. We have Craig Obie here from their Washington office and John Adonato from Hollywood, Florida. And I'd like both of them to stand so you can recognize them. This is Craig here and John here. They were both instrumental in putting this conversation together, as they've been proponents of having a conversation on preservation issues here in the South, and particularly here in Louisiana with our Senator. I also like to recognize the Superintendent of Cane River Creole National Historic Park, Laura Gates. She's over here. I think most of you know her. And I'd also like to recognize the Executive Director of the Cane River Heritage Area, Cynthia Sutton. She's here. Can you stand up? She's not standing. And also the Friends of NCPTT, the Friends group that supports our work here, is sponsoring the food and has helped with many other aspects of putting this together today. And we have at least Tom Whitehead, our president, here today. Is Tom? Or he's in the back. Sharon Gahagan is also on our board of the Friends here. I don't think I see Sharon here this morning, but I just want to recognize her as well. And then I'm going to introduce all the speakers that are going to be on our panel this morning, and then we're going to hear a few words from Laura Gates, and then we're going to go right on into the panel. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of the panel speakers this morning and have each of them stand for you so you can recognize them. So our first speaker today will be John Stubbs. And John is a native Louisianan who's been away from us for a long time and worked in many jobs, including at the World Monuments Fund in New York, but is now the director of the Historic Preservation Program at Tulane University and has been doing a great job down there. So he's the Favreau Senior Professor of Preservation Practice at Tulane, as well as director of the Master of Preservation Studies group. So John, wherever you are, can you stand up and let people see you? There we go. Thank you. And next after John will be Pam Breaux, and many of you know Pam in the community already. Pam is our State Historic Preservation Officer. She's going to be speaking on statewide preservation issues this morning. She's the Assistant Secretary in the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, and she's also, of course, the SHPO for the state. So Pam, would you stand wherever you are and let us recognize you? Thank you. We appreciate your coming up. We thank so much all of those who've come in from out of town for this. A lot of people traveled very far to get here today, and we appreciate that. And next, I'd like to recognize another old friend of mine, Patty Gay, who is the director of the Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans. Patty, can you stand? She'll be speaking on community preservation guidelines, concerns today. And as you know, Patty runs one of the premier local preservation groups in the United States, so we'll be excited to hear from her this morning as well. And then I'm particularly pleased to present my boss to you today, the Associate Director for Cultural Resources in the National Park Service. She's officially the Director of Cultural Resources, Partnerships, and Science. And Stephanie is over all of the cultural resource activities of the Park Service, everything in the National Park System, everything in our partnership programs, the National Register, HABs here, all the national landmarks, all of those programs that you're familiar with are all under her direction. She's been a tremendous supporter of NCPTT, and we're glad to have her with us this morning. Stephanie Toothman, if you could stand. And then following Dr. Toothman this morning, we'll be hearing from Donald Cravens, who's, as I said, is the Chief of Staff for Mary Landrieu. And Donald, he's sitting up here front, if you could. All right, well, thank you. We're going to just let everyone come up and speak in a row, and then we're going to have a little time to chat together afterwards. But before we get started into the main program, I wanted to have a few words with you about why we're here together today. And NCPTT was founded 20 years ago today, and it was founded after a congressional study of the National Historic Preservation Act said that there ought to be a center like this that needed to exist in the United States, and recommended the creation of it. And we conduct research here and in our laboratories on the campus at NSU, and we partner with universities and nonprofits all across the United States through our grants program and other cooperative ventures to undertake research and training in historic preservation. We've presented more than $8 million in research grants in the history of the center so far, and continue to present some grants every year. Our training program has a similar reach. We present training programs all over the United States and in the territories, as well, of course, as here at our home base here in Natchitoches. But like many of the national parks and all of the state historic preservation officers, our funding here has been flat for the entire history of the center for the last 2 decades. We have rising administrative costs, and our inflation mean that only about half of the spending power is available to us today that was available in the year that the center was created. And because of the way the budget is structured, we only have about 1/5 of the grant money to give away as far as the value. So the whole ability to do this kind of research has shrunk considerably. And we're really the only ones that fund research and preservation this way. There is no other source of these kinds of funds in the United States. So one solution that would help almost everyone that's involved in preservation is to fully fund the Historic Preservation Fund, and I would like to put that idea out as a topic for discussion this morning with the panel. The Historic Preservation Fund is authorized at $150 million a year. It's never reached anywhere near that level of authorization. And if we could get that funding up to that level and then designate just 2% of it for research, then the center could give that money out to our partners at the State Historic Preservation Offices and at universities across the United States, and we could really stimulate research in the field in a way that hasn't been able to be done in a long time. The Historic Preservation Fund funding comes from payments to the federal government for offshore oil leases, so it doesn't require a new tax revenue stream. It just requires that Congress appropriate the money that's already been collected for that from those leases. There's a sister fund, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, that funds recreation and park land acquisition, and it has now just recently been fully funded, and we need the parallel support for the Historic Preservation Fund now so that we can have the support for the state preservation offices and for all of our partnership programs across the country. So that's my one topic to put out on the table this morning. There are lots of other things I could talk about, but I'm not on the panel this morning. We invited people that we thought you'd be interested in hearing from today, and these are all good friends of mine and people that I respect, and we're looking forward to hear what they have to say. So once again, welcome to NCPTT this morning. We're glad all of you are. I'm delighted at the turnout here on a Saturday morning. I'm sorry again that the senator couldn't be with us, but she sends her regrets and has sent us some good representatives in her place, so we're glad to have you all here today. And now I'm going to turn the gavel over to Laura Gates, the superintendent at Cane River Creole. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk, and good morning, everyone. And I would like to thank all who are participating today in formal situations, such as the hosts, or just with your attendance here, because it's very meaningful that all of you feel so strongly about historic preservation that you came to this event. Kirk had mentioned, and I wasn't planning to talk about this at all, the issues with the Historic Preservation Fund, and in addition, the national parks are also hurting. We have an $11 billion maintenance backlog. And the maintenance backlog doesn't only hit the historic roads that we have in the national park system, but our historic landscapes, our historic structures. And so those are challenges that we face on a daily basis, even at small parks such as mine. But actually, the person that I'm here to talk about this morning is our dear Laura Hudson, who meant so much to the historic preservation community, not only here, but throughout the world. Laura Hudson was a native of New Orleans, and her career spanned more than 40 years on Capitol Hill, and also in international and corporate relations. She left us on May 11th due to cancer. Laura retired this past April as the International Government Affairs Manager for Chevron Corporation, and that was a post that she had been in since 2005. She had had a similar position for the Unocal Corporation for 9 years before that company was acquired by Chevron. In each position, she was based in a Washington office. She helped to shape legislative and executive branch policy that affected companies and guided the company's relationships with host governments in countries in Asia and Europe, and particularly in Asia. Laura began her career in 1973 as a legislative aide in the office of Senator J. Bennett Johnston, who is from Louisiana. And at her memorial service, Senator Johnston said that it was his first week there on Capitol Hill as a U.S. Senator, and this young woman walked into his office and said, "I'm going to work for you." And I'm from Louisiana, I'm from New Orleans, and I'm highly skilled. So he gave her a job in the mailroom. She lasted in the mailroom 1 week before he had moved her up into increasing positions of authority, and eventually she rose to become his legislative director, and that's a post in which she served for many years before she left his office in 1996. In addition to the overall stewardship of his office's legislative agenda, Laura personally led Senator Johnston's efforts in a host of policy initiatives, including many in conservation and historic preservation. She oversaw the long fight leading to the creation of some amazing entities that we have here in Louisiana, including Jean Lafitte National Historical Park and Preserve, New Orleans Jazz National Historical Park, and my personal favorite, and Cynthia Sutton's personal favorite, Cane River Creole National Historical Park and Cane River National Heritage Area. And those two entities, this is the first time ever and the only time this has ever been done, where a national park and its affiliated national heritage area were created in the same piece of legislation, meant to work together on a daily basis. And it was Laura's concept that drove that legislation. She also directed the efforts leading to the creation of the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, and keeping it here in Natchitoches, Louisiana. In 1996, as Laura was getting ready to leave her position on the Hill, Congress paid tribute to her by naming the Visitor Center in the French Quarter at Jean Lafitte National Historical Park and Preserve the Laura C. Hudson Visitor Center. In supporting the honor, Senator Frank Murkowski from Alaska said there are parks, wildlife refuges, historic preservation projects, and other important projects in Louisiana and beyond which exist in very large measure because of the personal dedication and legislative skill of Laura Hudson. But she didn't stop there. Laura Hudson, she was a force of nature. One of the things that she did was work continuously with volunteer efforts. And she convinced in 1987 the Department of the Interior to help fund a project with the Close Up Foundation. And this foundation in 1988 used the funding that the department gave to bring more than 6,000 students and teachers from 6 Pacific Islands and the U.S. Virgin Islands to Washington and to other centers of American history. And those teachers developed classroom materials for many of the islands, and also they conducted extensive teacher training workshops and student forums after their experience. Upon learning of her death, Senator Johnston issued this statement. He said, "In 24 years as a United States Senator, I had the great privilege and honor of working with hundreds, perhaps thousands of dedicated staff professionals. Of all of those fine people, it was Laura Hudson who most exemplified the best qualities of selfless public service." Excuse me. She was the master of every policy and process she faced, compiling an extraordinary record of achievements for the people of Louisiana and the country. For most of the years she was doing so, she was quietly facing, with grace and courage, the illness that ultimately took her life. For Mary and me, she really was a full member of our family. We are so grateful for her service and friendship, and we are filled with grief that she is gone. Excuse me. Sorry. On another note, Laura Hudson really understood preservation, and in March of last year, Britain's Prince Philip honored Laura Hudson and 9 other people at Buckingham Palace for her work in fostering preservation on a fragile island off the coast of Australia. And the others were 9 other world leaders, and they were all recognized at a luncheon ceremony at Buckingham Palace. Laura was a friend of Louisiana and also to preservation in the broadest sense. My friend Andy Farrell always has a great quote. He says, you know, preservation is not the end. Preservation is only the beginning. And Laura Hudson exemplified that. She understood that preservation involves the strength of community, of cultures, of grassroots efforts to preserve our heritage and this special place of Louisiana for future generations. Thank you. Now I would like to introduce our first panelist, John Stubbs. Thank you.
Before you hear from John, I just wanted to say a few words. Apologies. I'm Craig Obie. I'm Senior Vice President with the National Parks Conservation Association, and I just want to say how thrilled we are to be co-sponsoring this with our partners here today. And for those of you who don't know NPCA, we were started by the first director of the National Park Service in 1919, Stephen Mather, who wanted an organization outside of government, citizen organization that would both protect the parks and keep government honest in protecting the parks for future generations. And that's what we do, have been doing for almost 100 years. Today we have 1 million members and supporters around the country, many here in Louisiana. We've got 24 field offices around the country. And John Edernado runs our Suncoast office. A quick word about Laura and about Bennett and my work, our work with them. When I mentioned to Bennett that we were doing this today, and he called it a very worthy accolade, when Bennett and Laura got started, Louisiana had no units of the National Park System, and today there are 4. So that alone was a tremendous accomplishment. And that's a legacy that many are carrying on today. And in fact, people like Pam Breaux and Senator Landrieu recently made sure that Louisiana got the world's newest World Heritage Site at Poverty Point, which was a tremendous accomplishment. So the centennial of the National Park System is coming up in 2016. I'm sure many of you know that. And Natchitoches knows a thing or two about centennials since you're celebrating your 3rd. We mark centennials not just to celebrate, but also to foster action, to really look at what it is that we need to do next to continue the legacy that we're given. And part of that, Laura Hudson and Bennett Johnston, I had the pleasure to work with them on something called the National Park Second Century Commission a few years ago. And the whole purpose of that commission, which Bennett co-chaired with former Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker, was to re-envision what the national parks should be for the next century, how to foster preservation over the next century. And it included luminaries from across the country, and they came up with a whole host of recommendations for the future of our park system, enhancing the Heritage Areas program, fostering public and private partnerships, more cooperation, more funding. Kurt mentioned the Historic Preservation Fund, recommending a cultural resources challenge for the parks, a whole host of recommendations on the cultural and natural side of things. And now it's really time for all of us to think about how we make that vision a reality. How do we preserve these places that reflect our heritage, protect our heritage for posterity? How are we going to make sure that they're funded when we've got an approaching $12 billion backlog for the National Park Service, a whole host of associated challenges that go along with that? And how are we going to connect the next generation of Laura Hudsons to these tremendous places and create that next generation of advocates for preservation? So I just want to leave you with a short quote that the commission began its report with from Teddy Roosevelt. We have fallen heirs to the most glorious heritage a people ever received, and each one of us must do his part if we wish to show the nation is worthy of its good fortune. And Laura did that, and now it's up to us to carry forward so that in 100 years from now, those people looking back at us say, they did it right, they protected our heritage, and now we need to follow their example. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Greg. Those are great thoughts for us as we go into the panel now. So John Stubbs from Tulane University, we have you on deck. Thank you.
Wow. These, I've not heard more moving words of praise toward preservationists, I think, ever. And it's to people who really deserve it. And it reminds me that this field is all about people. It's by, for, and about people, heritage protection. And I just have to say how moving it was to hear those words about Laura and her circle, and think about these organizations cited on the bottom of the screen and many others that are selflessly, generously putting their best efforts in helping make not only our country but the world a better place. And as a globetrotter and one who's committed my career to this since about the first time I came to Natchitoches as a chauffeur for my father, who was the architect for Cherokee Plantation, what would that be, about 1970. That's when I was bitten by the preservation bug as a country boy from Monroe, Louisiana. You know, there's not a lot of modern anything to inspire, at least in that town, as a young architect in the making. So I looked the other direction at history And man, do we have it in Louisiana. So from there, I went to LSU. From there, studied in Rome and worked on archaeological sites in Italy and Egypt, and caught wind of the first graduate program in historic preservation in America at Columbia University that was also founded by essentially a Louisianian, James Marston Fitch. Never looked back from the first day of class because of the endless fascination that this field holds and its significance in every respect. And so my message today is really reflective of an incredible learning odyssey I've had over nearly 40 years in the field. Again, starting with life on a bayou in North Louisiana, ending up, working for the National Park Service in Washington for a couple of years, helping administer the tax incentives for preservation back when they were just being launched, and from there doing corporate architectural practice in New York, again on a number of National Park Service projects like Ellis Island, and from there meeting the real challenge of my career, the World Monuments Fund, a private not-for-profit based in New York that does work all over the world. Another inspiration of another inspired natural leader, an American who started that enterprise in 1965 after the floods of Venice that some of you may remember. So I served as program director in charge of field projects for the World Monuments Fund for 21 years. It had me traveling all over the place. I went to over half of the world's countries, looking at identifying and planning architectural preservation projects is part of a global advocacy scheme to raise awareness for the plight of historic buildings and it's in all of its importance. And was that a learning experience? I've been trying to write books about this, two of which are on the back table there. And my obsession really all along was looking at solutions used around the world in this field. I've done some extreme traveling. I'm really almost embarrassed to say how much I've traveled. I've got 3 million miles on just one airline. Some student figured out I've been to the moon 7 times and back in terms of travel. So I have really seen a lot. And I don't really brag about it. What I really am here to say is that from all these places I've visited, I'm here to report that cultural heritage protection that's dealt with in a deliberate, organized way is truly a global concern. I even dare to say in my first book, it's a global movement. Every country on the planet has cultural heritage protection, nature conservation, or cultural heritage conservation as an agenda item. Many countries have it as a very high agenda item. And that's really the lessons I really saw firsthand in roaming through France and meeting the best people in the fields in Italy and Russia and Vietnam and Chile and you name it. I've really had a glorious time meeting my counterparts all over the place. And we're like building doctors. We don't even have to speak the same language. We know the limits of the field and the nomenclature of the field and the objectives and so on and so forth. And it's just amazing how the world is concerned with this subject in the light of all the other stuff going on in the world as it charges forward through time. And honestly, after all these decades, I really realize, especially after presentations like earlier this morning, how unbelievably important this is. The stakes couldn't be higher. We're talking about the human habitat, our sense of place, our sense of orientation, our sense of history. At the bottom line through it all is people in continuity. And that's what's so special, among other things, about the NCPTT being here in Natchitoches, in Louisiana, right here. This is a proud, proud asset to the state that could have been in any other state. But here it is, and not just any town of Louisiana, Natchitoches. We're a little bit jealous in New Orleans of Natchitoches. You've got 3 years on us in terms of our history, and so we're trying to live with that, but it is way cool that we're in the oldest city in the state, the first French settlement, and it's an honor So Kurt and your team and the Park Service in general, its commitment to architectural heritage conservation, kudos. Conservation science and technology, as you see illustrated on these posters on the wall, in my opinion, are the single most defining activity of the profession. They really reflect how serious this business is, and it's one of the best hopes we've got to figure out what to do with buildings from a technical standpoint, and it underscores how scientific and serious this business can be. So to have that resource here in Louisiana is the sort of mothership for the study of the science and technology of conservation is really something. So I really, in concluding, because I know there are a lot of speakers and a lot of Q&A later on, would just like to say that for all the history and all the effort and all the accomplishments, we have to keep at it and somehow do even better. Because the truth is, there's so many perils to history. I mean, really, the list goes long. They fall under two categories, the human-made sources and the natural sources, from fire and rain and flood and earthquakes and lightning and whatever under the natural category. And sadly, the list of human threats to cultural heritage is growing longer year after year. Who would have thought terrorism and targeting heritage would be a big threat in our time? Well, it is, and it popped up just not, 10, 15 years ago. So the lists are growing longer, but we're getting smarter about it, all of this. I've long maintained that the best way to approach this is to look at the root cause of these things and go at that, not just the symptoms. But also, we have these fantastic new technologies and techniques for addressing these things. Who would have thought? I mean, look at the power of mass communication today and the way we can communicate by internet and so on and share lessons in the field and experiences and information and whatnot. That's a hugely powerful tool. The state of preservation education is at an all-time high and growing. I'm proud that my little program at Tulane, which was started about 15 years ago, is bigger and better than ever. We're having a blast tweaking it for the better with cool new lecturers and courses and whatnot, and having a good time doing one thing that might interest you all, I might add. Parenthetically, we've developed a history of New Orleans preservation, really history of Louisiana preservation, and Laura Hudson's going to be on that list, by the way. It's called New Orleans Preservation Timeline, where we have a database where one can look at the progress of preservation in the state over time, from the beginnings in the 1850s. That's interesting, because we all wonder, sooner or later, why are things the way they are? And we have all these people to thank, people whose shoulders we're standing on to this day, to continue with. So there are other things as well, but I really would like to say, after all this, well, it's an honor to be here with you all at home in North Louisiana, among people I love, in a very special place, the Cane River. So congratulations on your huge accomplishment. Kudos to the NCPTT. Our friendships, growing friendships together, and through the course of the morning we'll be hearing about more solutions, directions, ideas for going forward. And so power to us, and long may we wave. Thank you all.
Thank you, John. We can always count on you for some good food for thought. Now, we have many wonderful SHPOs in the United States, but we're blessed to have one of the best in Louisiana. And so I want to welcome Pam Breaux now to the podium. Thank you.
Whoa. See if we can bring this down to my size. Good morning, everybody. Okay, I'm going to get set up here. I couldn't be more happy to be here today. It's a gorgeous sunny morning in Natchitoches, and I got in yesterday afternoon with just enough time to stroll Front Street before connecting to my fellow panelists for a really nice evening. And I came to Natchitoches yesterday via Oberlin, so Baton Rouge, Oberlin, and Natchitoches. Do you know where Oberlin is? Oberlin is in Allen Parish, okay? So it's about 120 or so miles southeast of here. And I was there because I was asked to speak at a ceremony honoring the centennial. The centennial theme is happening here today, but the centennial of the Allen Parish Courthouse. And I was asked by their committee to address two particular points. The first thing they asked me to do is to remind our community that local and state history and culture are really important. Well, and certainly when we stop to think about that, we kind of all agree that it's important, but it's fair that it's important to be reminded from time to time. So they asked me to speak to that, as well as to use the opportunity to remind the community that with respect to history and culture, it's also important to work together, roll up the sleeves to get things done. And of course there's a lot of collaboration in Allen Parish, as there is everywhere, but I thought it was an interesting request, and it certainly shaped some of the stories I shared with them. What's interesting about that request and being in Natchitoches today is that here we have a community that has thrived because of its commitment to preserving its culture, preserving its architecture, preserving its history, and then really strategically bringing those things to bear to progress the community and moving it forward. And so it's given me a lot of good pause and excitement to have both these experiences and these questions swirling around this very week. And so as I chatted with the folks in Oberlin, I told them the story of Poverty Point, and I'm doing that a lot these days because it's very important and on the radar, and I find that the question I'm about to ask you, there's a very different answer as I move up the state. So how many people here have heard of Poverty Point and know where it is? You see, just about everybody. That wasn't the case 120 miles southeast of here, and it's definitely not the case, along the I-10 where I hail from myself. But Poverty Point is so incredibly important because, I'll tell you a little bit about why it is. And you probably know generally, and some of you very specifically, what is so special about Poverty Point. But literally 3,400 years ago, it was settled by a remarkable group of Native Americans, and they lived there 600 years. 600 years. A highly organized and effective settlement engaged in a lot of really smart principles, like flood control. They did that really well. And so it's amazing that at that point in time, 3,400 years ago, there was a community that was very advanced that sustained itself in this state that we call Louisiana. And just to kind of give you an idea of what that means in terms of what was going on in the world at that time, 3,400 years ago, here were the headlines, and here's how Louisiana fit. In Egypt, Queen Nefertiti and the boy Pharaoh Tutankhamun, right, King Tut, they ruled. In Britain, Stonehenge was being wrapped up, okay? They were just finishing it. In China, the Shang Dynasty was flourishing. And in North America, particularly all of this space, the U.S. space north of Mexico, the assumption was that everyone was nomadic, all right? Bands of hunter-gatherers. And, well, here we are in Louisiana, 3,400 years ago, and today, we're just a little bit different, right? Some things don't change about this place we call home. And so I think it's a source of pride for all of us here that Poverty Point gave the United States, quite frankly, some archaeologists even phrase it this way, America's first city, because it was very much a settlement, and obviously our first Louisianians, and that particular term is one our Lieutenant Governor Jay Darden likes to use. And so for the past 8 years, the community of Northeast Louisiana and our office have worked together, rolling up our sleeves to position Poverty Point for some significant recognition that it deserves. We began the trek toward getting Poverty Point listed as a World Heritage Site. And, although Baton Rouge and our office is certainly in a very different place in the state from Northeast Louisiana. We very much functioned as a community in getting this done. And so over the course of those years, it was important for us to be in constant conversations with the farmers surrounding the site. The Native American tribes of the southeastern part of the country, we all formed really a community, rolling up our sleeves to get that work done. And so on June 22nd, Poverty Point became the United States' 22nd World Heritage Site. So amongst about just over 1,000 other World Heritage Sites across the world. And so, of course, that brings a really interesting opportunity. Be careful with your journeys. 8 years ago, we thought the journey was, we're going to get World Heritage status, which we did, and we're very excited about that. But that wasn't the destination. We're still on the journey. And so now the question becomes, and the opportunity, and it is, how do we now work with the community there and as a community to really turn that into something amazing? I mean, we know there'll be an automatic bump in tourism. Even my personal Facebook page told me, or showed me, about a week after the inscription of Poverty Point, that there were Louisianians bringing their German visitors to Poverty Point to celebrate that fact. I mean, lots of folks in Europe, just for example, World Heritage Sites are on the bucket list. They want to see them. And so we've already begun to see a small bump in tourism, but now is the opportunity to really roll our sleeves up as a community and get busy ensuring that we position and leverage the property and the community to really reap great rewards. And Natchitoches, as it strikes me, has been really good at that in so many ways. I mean, there are lots of examples. I'll use a tiny one that happens to come to mind right now, because yesterday as I was strolling, I stopped to check out the Steel Magnolias house, right? And it strikes me that, obviously having the film done here was important, and that inherently created a tourism bump, but Natchitoches did some really smart and strategic work and a lot of hard work since that time to leverage those opportunities even more. And that's just one tiny piece in the tourism equation that this area has done so very well. And so the onus is on us now to begin to get that work done. Just big picture, we're forming a commission alongside some task forces to really help the community plan and move forward around ideas of helping to protect the site, developing tourism, developing sensitive small business approaches to supporting a tourism industry, and really doing that in a way that honors the local agricultural community as well as the importance of the site. So we're very excited to get that work moving, and we'll be celebrating launching that work as well as the formal dedication of Poverty Point as a World Heritage Site on October the 11th. I know that's a big weekend here, so I'm not going to give you a hard sell. But if you find you have a little time on October the 11th, we're celebrating Poverty Point at Poverty Point all day long with a big community celebration kicking off at 10 in the morning with a dedication ceremony, and then moving into just a lot of community fun. So we're excited to join. I'd like to share two other pieces of information with you around the idea of how historic preservation and culture are really helping to build Louisiana's communities, and in a way that I think we can be proud of, just like the opportunity at Poverty Point. Our office directs and manages the Louisiana Main Street program. Natchitoches knows that program well because you're one of our shining examples of a Main Street community. We now have 37 Main Street communities, and of course this group doesn't need me to tell them what that's about, historic preservation, economic restructuring, and great training for volunteers who do amazing work to garner some really great results. And so just big picture, last year The Louisiana Main Streets, okay, so all 37 of those districts within communities. Last year, 147 net new businesses were created in those communities. That's an average of 4 new businesses per community. Those 37 communities also created 436 jobs, and 9,300 volunteers worked countless hours to help that happen. Now, last year, and well, actually this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Main Street program for our state. 30 years of results like that, consistent, good results that have grown over time. So it's a program we're really excited about, but most importantly, I think for today's discussion, it's a program that really demonstrates how preservation and culture can really have a deep community impact that's economic, it's social, it's cultural, and it's just all around fulfilling for a community. The second example I'd like to provide is from our Cultural Districts program, which is a whole lot newer. And so when we developed that program about 6 years ago, it was designed to pair selling original artwork from Louisiana's creative people alongside historic preservation to create hubs of cultural activity. And so many communities have taken us up on the opportunity to try to get that done. And so over the course of these 6 years, we now have 75 cultural districts across our state. Small communities, large communities, just trying to use their authentic selves, you know, their culture, their art, and preservation as a catalyst for community revitalization. Arnoldville, Louisiana is an example I'd love to use today because this past week they just celebrated some amazing milestones. It's a town of 1,400, and their cultural district and creative placemaking efforts on the economic side, it's doubled the town tax coffers, doubled. On the cultural side and the social side, people who left Arnoldville fast, you know, after high school, they're beginning to come back and start businesses. Amazing things are happening there. And it's a town of 1,400. You know, it's about a vision and a commitment to work as a cohesive unit, rolling up the sleeves to get work done. And so when you look at all the cultural districts across our state, since 2008, okay, the districts have reported, and just bear in mind, in 2008, we didn't have very many districts, so we've moved up gradually to the 75 districts. Since 2008, $42 million in the sale of original one-of-a-kind art has happened in those districts. That's not all the art sales in our state. That's just a slice. The only slice this accounts for is the art sales that happen to benefit from a sales tax exemption that we've created as an incentive in the program. There's a lot of other art that's sold in the districts. For example, you do a photograph and you have 1,000 prints and you sell those. That's not included. This is strictly original one-of-a-kind artwork. And so the art business in our state is significant, and it's important for us to realize that. And it's not, you know, about starving artists, it's about business as well as art and culture. In those cultural districts, blight is down. Vacancy rates are down along those commercial corridors. Across those 75 districts, over 2,000 net new businesses are in existence. And every year, the total revenues for those districts increase. This past year, 2013, they saw $1.27 billion in revenue. And so what sort of bringing culture to the center is doing is creating spaces and places that people want to be in. You know, visitors as well as our citizens alike. And so in accepting the invitation to be here today, I had no idea that Allen Parish would be on this agenda. And I guess I didn't realize that until the afternoon before I went to Allen Parish and began thinking about what I expected for both convenings. You know, and the Allen Parish questions of why history is important, and why we need to work together to get things in culture done. And you know, it strikes me that the Allen Parish questions are the fundamental reason today's convening here in Natchitoches are so important. I mean, preservation conversations need to take place because there are a lot of benefits, but those I'm focusing on right now are the community building benefits that I think are so important in our state and across our state. And as many preservation and arts and culture good news stories as we can count to, I mean, that's wonderful, and certainly we need to applaud those. But at the same time, I'm stricken by the fact that there are other areas of our state and more communities that can benefit from these very same kinds of initiatives. So that leaves you with a couple of ideas. One, I'm going to try to pay homage to Kirk's original question about resources. And, you know, I'm not going to speak to the Historic Preservation Fund, but I am going to throw out a kernel of an idea as food for thought, and it's one that I threw out actually with our panel over dinner last night, and it's the idea of legacy and Americans investing in legacy and the legacy they want to leave. And the example I want to use for you there is Minnesota, of all places, right? Within the past few years, not even 5 years ago, I believe, Minnesotans levied upon themselves via constitutional amendment a legacy tax. And it's a 25-year tax dedicated to trying to ensure that the Minnesota they leave their grandkids is a Minnesota that is good, that has 10,000 lakes that are not polluted lakes, but clean lakes, that has arts and history and clean water, culture, parks, zoos, evocative of the kind of environment and cultural scene they want to leave as the inheritance, you know, for the people who come behind them. And so that happened because interesting communities of constituents came together and worked on this for about 10 years. Never before had arts and fisheries worked together. So the folks who banded together were, you know, the clean water folks, fisheries, arts, preservation, zoos, parks. Interesting cast of characters. I mean, in hindsight, I mean, I think that there are some things they obviously have in common, and they eventually figured that out. But the idea of legacy, I think, might be an interesting one. I'm not necessarily suggesting a legacy tax, but I think what I am suggesting, whether it's in Louisiana specific or United States large, the idea of a people stepping up to invest in the legacy that they want to leave is one that should be in the hopper as we think about resources for preservation and culture and how we might sort of reimagine those in a bit of a different way. So I'm going to leave you with a final, just a smidge of something that's a little bit fun. Some of you may know already that the new National Geographic Traveler is out for October. If you haven't seen it yet, you should pick one up because it focuses on Louisiana. No, we did not pay for that opportunity. This was something they did, and it refers to Louisiana very specifically and appropriately as, let's see, the weirdest country in America. And if you're like me, you're really proud of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. You gave us some wonderful examples of how preservation can be such a powerful tool to build communities and improve their economies and the quality of life in them. So thank you for sharing those thoughts with us today. And next we want to invite up Patty Gay, the Executive Director of the Preservation Resource Center in New Orleans. I was realizing last night that I've known Patty since 1978. So she's an old and dear friend of mine and a great inspiration to me in my career, and we just welcome her to the podium this morning. Thank you.
That is so nice, and how wonderful to be here today. We are thrilled to have Senator Landrieu's staff. We know the work that you do, and we know you're going to take all these messages back and act on these things. And we do indeed have our work cut out for us. Before I get into that negative, just a little bit about the positive I want to add to everything that has been said. First, can you believe that we have John Stubbs here in Louisiana? I mean, he is, I'm positive, the most well-traveled, which is not the important thing, the best expert internationally on historic preservation around the world. He knows more than anyone, I am positive, on historic sites around the world. And look, he's right here in our state. Thank you, John, for coming back. We are so fortunate. And I want to thank our State Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism in particular for the work of Poverty Point and for making our state rank year after year, almost every year, in the top 10 states in the country in dollars invested in our state through the rehab tax credit, the federal rehab tax credit. Now, name some more lists where we're at the top, okay? And the problem is, to get into the bad side of it, that is not recognized. We are not recognized as an industry. Of course, everybody here, I'm preaching to the crowd, and that's what we've got to figure out here today, is how do we get this word out? We all know it, but how many people know it? I mean, we have some built-in problems. You renovate buildings. How can we expect people to know what went into getting those buildings renovated when they see them all in their glory? But yet blood, sweat, and tears and more went into saving buildings in New Orleans especially. My organization is a little different from a lot of other preservation organizations in that we do buy, restore, and renovate vacant and blighted properties. And that means we have to sell the properties. We don't have the money to do it and give it away. And so we sell these properties through awareness, and we sell advocacy through awareness through this magazine. We get a grant from the state. We're very proud to have the state sponsoring this magazine with us. And I think we do a pretty good job marketing and promoting the incredibly rich resources that we have in this state, but throughout the state, not just New Orleans. But when the storm hit, the PRC had already targeted a lower 9th Ward historic neighborhood, the Holy Cross neighborhood. And it was flooded, but guess what? The water went out within 3 days. Of course, the people couldn't come back for almost 8 months to live in their houses or even to do anything to repair their houses. But we said, well, we are here for the long run. So this came out in 2011. We marketed that neighborhood. We're soon selling our 45th and 46th house in this neighborhood, and we've gotten property values to go up a little bit the way you want them to do. You want people's investment at least to be stabilized, not to be plunging. And so this neighborhood is looking good. And so I'm so glad to know that, John, you went into the Holy Cross neighborhood, and we wish we could put a little plaque up on the houses that we have done there. Because not only have we done those buildings, we have another program that, again, is different from other preservation organizations. It's called Rebuilding Together, where we put volunteer teams to work on the homes of elderly, low-income homeowners or veterans or single-parent head of household. And it's all low-income homeowners, and it is so exciting. We were doing it every October before the storm. After the storm, it was everywhere all the time. The volunteer teams came in from all over the country. It was incredible. That reminds me, if anyone asks me, well, what should we do? Do you have any lessons for preparedness for disasters? And I would say the first thing you need to do now is make sure you have a place that people love, because our whole city was evacuated. People went elsewhere for long lengths of time. And to a great degree, our city is dysfunctional. We have some problems in our city, and people saw, oh, well, there's not quite so much corruption, maybe not quite so much crime, maybe better schools, but guess what? People loved our city. They came back, new people have moved here, people love it, and I say, naturally, you would expect me to say this, it is because what we have done in historic preservation. And New Orleans was still a large city back in 1936. Throughout the 19th century, well, for more than half, we were in the top 5 cities. And that we continued to grow after the Civil War, and, you know, jazz evolved and so forth. So that just tells you a lot about what was going on in New Orleans for many decades. And in 1936, we became the first large city, and actually I need to do a little research to see who was the next large city to do this, to create a historic district. And we established the Vieux-Carré Commission. We're the only large city that has its original city. Name one, you can't do it. Now, Charleston can't stand it. They were before us with their commission, but we were 7 times bigger, and it is different when you're a big city. And we know that other towns, and thank goodness we have Natchitoches that is just such a jewel in the crown. And believe me, a lot of us know in New Orleans that you're older than we are. So it's sometimes surprising for them to find out, but we tell them. So many great things have happened. The Main Street program, well, the rehab tax credit, of course, has helped to bring back our cities. Now, most of you probably think, oh, it's great. American cities are coming back. They're being revitalized. The downtowns now have people walking on the streets, fewer vacant and blighted buildings. Don't think for 1 minute that the work is over, please. And the problem is that people don't understand the role of historic preservation in this comeback of these cities. It was President Reagan, I do believe, who said, and we're celebrating our 40th anniversary, and I've been there the whole time at PRC, and so my memory fails maybe, or I get things mixed up. I love superlatives and hyperbole, but I think preservation deserves it. But I think it was President Reagan who said a nation is as great as its cities. And guess what? Our cities aren't so great anymore, and I brought this chart for you to see about population decline from the peak to what they are today. And when we did this, it was about a year and a half ago that we created this chart. My assistant found out somewhere that St. Louis is the only city on record with over 500,000 people to have lost 2/3 of its population. And, of course, Detroit has lost a lot more, but it's a lot bigger than St. Louis. I have some copies of this, so you can get it later, and if you want to be totally depressed. But you know what? If we don't know that we have a problem, it's not going to be addressed. And people are moving back to cities, but it could be a bubble that bursts. We are not there yet. And the preservation programs and the historic built environment are what we can use to make that happen. And I submit to you that the fact that our National Park Service has $11 billion in maintenance that needs to be done, and the fact that our Main Street program, I don't know what the peak was compared to now, but I know that since 2009, when I looked at it in 2011, it had been cut in half, this fabulous Main Street program. Okay, so I submit to you that it's because people, and not here so much in Natchitoches, but because of this general decline of cities, we have lost a civic consciousness, a civic awareness. We have lost educationally. Our educational levels are not keeping up with other places in the world. I'm so full of good news, aren't I? But I think it has everything to do with cities and the decline of cities. And perpetuate civic ideals and history. And just the very built environment teaches you something when you walk down the street. It tells you that people were here before. You can't teach people everything in the classroom. That is ridiculous. It is, well, anybody who knows anything about education knows that is, that's the case. So we have to keep going with our cities. And do you know every year we have to lobby for the rehab tax credit? Now, as I said, we have been in the top 10 almost every year. I mean, it's a complicated thing, the way we're evaluated. We have generally more projects in a lot of states way up there, which I think is good. In other words, we have many big projects, but we have a lot of smaller projects too, which means it's spread around. I like that. And I'm so proud of our State Preservation Office. Let's give them a hand. I mean, really. I'm not kidding. What list are we almost consistently near the top? A good list. And it's something, and I'm talking about dollars. I'm not talking about, oh, isn't it nice? You know, we, of course, want to save our buildings because of our historic heritage and so forth, and how valuable they are. It's the economics of it that we need to argue right now. And so I want to leave you with the two things. Well, first of all, I do want to say that how wonderful it has been in just a short amount of time to link up with the National Park Conservation Association, an advocacy group, and others here today. How wonderful for us to hear about Laura Hudson, how wonderful for us to hear about the great work here. It really is a jewel in the crown, and surely we can do the right things with tourism. I loved hearing about the planning that is now going on. We know in New Orleans you can do the wrong thing. I mean, tourism success can lead to some bad things. I mean, if we preservationists blinked our eyes for 10 minutes, the Vieux Carré would be a Bourbon Street theme park, not Disneyland, a Bourbon Street theme park. That whole thing would just go. And so success breeds its own problems. So you have, and I think our state office is aware of that, we have to do the right thing with Poverty Point. We have to avoid cultural degradation. Isn't that a great term? That we think about it. And so we've made some good connections here, but I will leave you with the importance of awareness. And we need ideas. Let's all try to think about what we can do to get the word out about how important preservation is as a means to an end, to save our cities and to bring back more awareness on the part of every citizen. And I did bring some magazines, so please help yourself in the back. And I did, I'm very happy to say, because you wonder, do people read or not? Excuse me, but you know, people read less and less, I do believe. But this column that I wrote on livability, tourism, and the economy has gotten a lot of attention. Now, these are all on our website, and don't ask me about social media and all of that, but we started doing this newspaper, and I was the first volunteer co-editor back in '75, I believe. It's all on now. On our archived on our website, but let's try to figure out what more we can do to generate awareness. And the next thing is the advocacy. We absolutely have got to get our act together for advocacy. We have to get all of our members of Congress to support the rehab tax credit and full funding for the Historic Preservation Fund for all the good that is done. Can you believe $150 million for the whole U.S.? That's what we're asking for. We've never gotten even half of that. In all of these years, we've never even gotten half of it, and look at the good we have done. I mean, some people think, oh, you're going to lobby for $150 million for Louisiana. Nope. The whole United States. But a little bit goes a long way in historic preservation. Just look at Main Street. It's not much funding. If you don't have a little bit, though, you're not going to go anywhere. But a little bit goes a long way. And one more accolade. Do you know that 3 cities called up Ray Scriber and said, we want to become Main Street towns. And he said, as he's had to say recently, he said, well, I'm sorry, we can't do it. We don't have any funding. And they said, we don't care. Just designate us a Main Street town. And of course, they will come up with some of their own resources, because you do have to have that little bit. But Kenner, we put them on the front page of our magazine. Kenner and Houma and Monroe all said, we want to be Main Street towns, even if you don't have funding. Well, doesn't that make your heart feel good? But aren't you ashamed that we don't have the funding anymore? So we have got to work hard for that in Baton Rouge and in Washington. And one last thing, preservation is bipartisan. For better or for worse, it is bipartisan, and we have to sing that song, and surely the Republicans can buy into it. We are talking about private investment, and we are talking about catalyst. We're not talking about things that need ongoing subsidy. There's some things that get subsidized, and the minute that subsidy goes away, they're gone too. Not in preservation. If the rehab credit disappears, guess what? You're going to still see the buildings. And I will say that I'm very proud to say that I was on the board of the National Center for Preservation Technology in '97, late 90s, when the fire occurred, and I'm so happy. We didn't know if we were ever going to get this building restored in those years. So it's fantastic. Thank you for your good work, all of you, and let's all vow today that we are going to do better with our advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty, for that enthusiastic reminder of what we've accomplished. Surely, of any movement in the United States, we're the most successful with the least recognition for what we've accomplished. I think we can be proud that we've helped really begin to turn around our cities, and we need to know, all of our policymakers and elected representatives, to know that these are the tools that have been successful over these years, and we need to strengthen and continue them. So thank you very much. I'd like to now welcome my boss to the podium, again, Associate Director Stephanie Toothman. She's the Associate Director for Cultural Resources, Partnerships and Science in Washington, D.C., and again, as I said, over all the preservation programs. I was trying to think what I could say about her that isn't going to embarrass her this morning, but so I'm going to embarrass her anyway. I have worked for the Park Service for 34 years. I began my career here in Louisiana and have spent all the rest of that time that I've been working in preservation. And I've had the privilege of knowing, I think, every associate director over the cultural resources programs in the Park Service. And most people that work in preservation even don't realize how critical this position is, because it's responsible for everything that goes on in the national parks, everything that goes on in the state historic preservation offices, all of our policy, all of the promotion, all of the funding, all that. She's the advocate for all of those kinds of things, and I have to say that she is the most thoughtful and competent of the associate directors I've had the privilege to know, and I'm thrilled to have her with us today. So, Stephanie.
Thank you, Kirk. That means a lot coming from you, because Kirk has been, from my perspective, without a doubt, the most effective leader of NCPTT in its history. It really is truly my pleasure to join you today. I can't tell you how much I recharge and get energized when I hear from what's going on here on the ground, from the folks who are making it work, from the creativity that I hear from Patty and Pam and the communities. It really does recharge me for going back and wading into the battles that we fight on a daily basis on your behalf. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to share with you the challenges that the National Park Service is facing as both a steward of some of our most valued national stories and sites, and as importantly, as an advocate for our partners for the National Preservation Program. Before I do that, though, I want to share with you Director Jarvis's greetings. He really wanted me to thank all of you in Louisiana who were so effective in leading the fight for the designation of Poverty Point. And until you've gotten into one of those efforts, it's really, you have no idea how much energy and resources it takes to do that. And we are so thrilled with the success, and we also very much appreciated Senator Landrieu's support in helping us secure that designation. All of us in the National Park Service also want to add our thanks for the work of Laura Hudson as an advocate in so many ways for historic preservation, and many of her ideas, as Laura Gates so effectively laid out today, have formed a lasting legacy that not only Louisiana but all of us benefit from. So I'm going to be talking about this. There are some copies still, I think, on the table. This is the Cultural Resource Challenge in its current form that Craig referred to. And it is our statement of where we think we need to go. But I'd like to start my remarks today by sharing with you an excerpt from the preamble to the 1966 National Historic Preservation Act, because that act continues to inspire me by the sheer brilliance of the concept and the legacy that it has helped us create. And it is featured very much so in this document. The spirit and direction of the nation are founded upon and reflected in its heritage. The historical and cultural foundations of the nation should be preserved as a living part of our community life and development in order to give a sense of orientation to the American people. The preservation of this irreplaceable heritage is in the public interest so that its vital legacy of cultural, educational, aesthetic, inspirational, economic, and energy benefits will be maintained and enriched for future generations. This preamble continues to inspire us today in its clarity, in the clarity with which it states the importance of preserving our shared heritage to all aspects of our lives, as families, as communities, as citizens. And as we approach the 50th anniversary of the Act and the National Park Centennial, both in 2016, the National Park Service, working with many of our partners, has taken this opportunity to reflect on both what we have achieved, and you've heard so much from Patty and Pam and John today, and from many others, what challenges we face, and what the opportunities are for moving forward. The partnership structure established by the Act to carry out a national preservation program, and those partners are federal, state, local, public, private, tribal, continues to be the strength of the program, as you've already heard. Supporting this partnership is thus one of the primary goals of the National Park Service's Cultural Resource Challenge, Preserving America's Shared Heritage in the 21st Century. In it, we outline not only the critical challenges we face at all levels of the partnership, but also our strategy for addressing those challenges within the context of declining budgets and staff that we all face, whatever level of government or public or private organization, we are all facing those challenges. You've already heard something about the HPF, and I apologize for the repetition, but it really is that foundation of the program, and I think it's worth repeating. To illustrate with a few statistics, some of which you've heard, the Cultural Resource Program staff capacity, and this is for the park side of our programs, for our stewardship of national parks, has declined by approximately 30% since 1997. These are statistics compiled by the National Academy of Public Administrators. And so for everyone who is doing such great work here in Louisiana and other in our national parks, there are ghosts of people who used to be there. For our state, local, and tribal partners, funding from HPF has remained essentially flat since 1980, outside of spikes for funding the Save America's Treasures program, which has not been funded since 2010. which funded projects like the restoration of Melrose Plantation and many others throughout the state, and which is greatly missed, and the disaster relief after Katrina and Sandy. Translating this into dollars, the $50 million the state programs received in 1980 would be approximately $143 million in 2014, very close to the $150 million authorization level that you've heard about. The combined funding for both states and tribal programs in 2014 was $56 million to provide support to 57 states and territories, 140 plus tribes, and 1,800 certified local governments. So what was seen as a adequate level of funding in 1980 is now barely covering our mandated reviews of federal projects. Funding for heritage areas such as Cane River has been a roller coaster ride, and the budget for the National Center for Preservation, Technology and Training scientific and research programs has remained flat since it was established in the late 1980s. The impact for NCPTT has been that the grants program that has been such a critical part of inspiring and supporting conservation research throughout the nation has essentially dwindled to a couple $100,000. The impacts of this flat funding on our partners has made full funding for the Historic Preservation Fund the #1 priority for the national preservation community and a goal of the Department of the Interior's America's Great Outdoors Initiative. We have identified through the challenge and through the Second Century Commission that Craig Obie referred to more than $200 million in funding needs for the 3 funding sources, the Historic Preservation Fund, the National Recreation and Preservation Fund, and the operations of the National Park Service to support our efforts in communities and national parks throughout the country. That said, we recognize the budget process is and most likely to continue to be uncertain for the foreseeable future. We recognize that the country is facing many challenges, and balancing between those needs is always a very difficult task for both Congress and the administration. The need for a major initiative, however, such as the National Park Service's Natural Resource Challenge of the 2000s is there. And the scope is greater because we're not just looking at the park's needs, we're looking at our partners' needs as well. In putting together the challenge, we chose to identify 5 major goals and 40 associated actions in areas in which we felt we could make progress by focusing our efforts, by collaborating with our partners, by seizing opportunities when we can. And opportunistic is my middle name, but you know, I'm going to look for partners wherever I can find, and I'm very pleased, for example, we've been able to reestablish a maritime heritage initiative by partnering with the Maritime Administration and receiving finally some of the receipts from the disassembly of old decommissioned ships. And so that program has just put out its first call for heritage grants since 1999, I think it was. So that's being opportunistic, but it's not a long-term solution. All of these goals and actions are scalable and aspirational, and we believe relevant to not only the National Preservation Program, but to the major challenges facing us as a nation. And I'd like to, in the short time today, focus on goals 3 and 4, because they are focused on that issue of relevancy. Under goal 3, we are seeking to connect all Americans to their heritage resources in a manner that resonates with their lives, legacies, and dreams, and tells the stories that make up America's diverse national identity. And I had the privilege this week to meet with a group of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders who are very interested in historic preservation. They're people who have really begun applying the guidelines, the opportunities for grants the support that we can give them in their communities in the Pacific and in the Pacific West. And they brought their meeting for the first time to Washington. Their enthusiasm, their need to tell their stories, to get that recognition is so palpable that it just touches you and it makes, again, it re-energizes you. This is what this, and they rarely represent what this goal means on the ground. In terms of actual implementation, and I'll just back up for a minute. When I came to Washington in 2010, I really came thinking, okay, this is our time. This is our time for the big ask for the Cultural Resource Challenge. And of course, obviously with the budget situation, that was not going to be the reality. And so we had a choice. We could put out the big ask. We could list the long list of needs that we have and our challenges, and then wait. Or we could say, waiting's not an option. These are fragile resources. They're irreplaceable when they're lost. And so we're going to seek every opportunity possible to see how we could move forward. So getting back to my remarks, what does this Goal 3 mean on the ground? It means that our park units are working with their associated communities to tell the diversity of stories associated with their parks. It means that Everglades, for example, is not only telling the incredible environmental story there, but it's telling the story of Dr. Mudd being incarcerated at Fort Jefferson after World War II, and telling the story, more contemporary story, of the Bay of Pigs invasion that was launched in part from a Nike missile site within the Everglades, and of the Cubans who continue to use the dry tortugas, which is also managed by Everglades, as their opportunity for that first landfall on American soil. Virtually all of our parks have this complexity of stories, and that's one of the things we're trying to support. The programs and preservation efforts right here in Louisiana between the park and heritage area here in Cane River is an outstanding example of this vision. Another example is our effort to tell the stories of all who participated in the Civil War, and in the past 2 years we have published new studies on the participation of people of Hispanic or descent, Native Americans, and Asian Americans in the Civil War. And when you look at the cover of the American Indians in the Civil War, you see a Cherokee tribal member who was the right hand of General Grant. How many people knew that story? And those are the kinds of stories that we're trying to bring out. We have launched 4 new initiatives nationwide, working with scholars to expand our understanding of the contributions and resources associated with American Latinos, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, women, and most recently, the LGBT community. And we are seeking to increase the representation of these resources in the National Register of Historic Places and in the National Landmark Program, because if we don't, then the description of the National Register as those places that Americans feel are worthy of preservation is really not as inclusive as it should be. We know that the National Park Service can only accomplish these goals through our partnerships, which again is why we were so excited to be able to establish yet another new grant program this year to help states survey communities that are presently underrepresented in their statewide surveys and in the national surveys as well. So we received an extra $500,000 this year in the HPF appropriation based on the groundwork that we did with the National Conference of SHPOs that showed that need. And we received more than 36 applicants in less than 30 days once we made the money available. And I will be very pleased to be able to share those, the awardees, which represent a variety of groups across the country, I think by the end of this month. So, but we had $1.5 million in requests and $500,000 to distribute, so we're very hopeful that 500,000 and or more will continue to be as part of the appropriation in 2015. So those are some of the things we're doing to increase our ability in the participation of all Americans and empowering them to tell their stories and to preserve the resources that are important to them. Goal 4, which is also looking at relevancy, and I think Patty spoke particularly to this, is to integrate the values of heritage stewardship into the major initiatives and issues such as renewable energy, community assistance and revitalization, sustainability, while cultivating excellence in science and technical preservation as a foundation for resource protection, management, and rehabilitation. Well, I don't need to tell the people of Louisiana how critical it is that we plan for dealing with the predicted impacts of changing climate in our heritage, on our heritage resources. And if we needed a reminder, Hurricane Sandy underscored the lessons along a long stretch of the East Coast in the past 2 years. The National Park Service alone experienced more than $500 million in damages to our own infrastructure for Hurricane Sandy, much of it to historic resources. So we are taking the federal lead in developing strategic plan for climate change as it impacts cultural resources and associated disaster response needs. NCPTT has been a critical part of that initiative. Among their many contributions have been disaster response assessment tools, training, and research into various conservation issues. Our Technical Preservation Services group is developing guidance for increasing the resiliency of historic structures, and we are assessing the vulnerability of our museum collections along the coastal parks. Right-sizing and community revitalization is another national challenge in which the power of preservation has been demonstrated and must remain a critical tool. This year's report on the historic tax credits for rehabilitation reports that in FY13, fiscal year 13, the National Park Service and states reviewed and certified 803 historic preservation projects representing $3 billion in estimated rehabilitation costs. Since the program's inception in 1976, more than 39,000 historic buildings representing $109 billion in investment and 2.4 billion jobs have been rehabilitated, making it one of the nation's most successful community revitalization strategies. Maintaining the credits is one of the highest priorities, along with the HPF, for the National Preservation Program. Another area in which we're working here in Louisiana and throughout the country is to maintain the traditional skills to ensure that we can preserve the thousands of historic structures and landscapes that we care for. And I want to commend Laura Gates and our Southeast region for announcing this year that they will be forming a team to focus on the issues of preserving traditional building practices in the South, including bussiage. Did I pronounce that correctly? She's been training me. And also, again, NCPTT for the research and technical support they provide to parks and partners on issues such as whitewashing and mortar analysis, which may seem, fairly low-key preservation, but for communities where that was a traditional skill, a traditional method of preserving, it's critical that we preserve the knowledge that will help preserve those buildings. So these are only a few of the initiatives that we're undertaking to prepare the National Park Service and our partners to answer the fundamental questions of knowing what we have, knowing what the threats are, and knowing what the range and feasibility of management options are to preserve our shared heritage. Expanding our access to and the usability of our national databases through GIS and digitization is underway. Engaging through interpretation, education, service and work opportunities, and technical assistance with all ages is another priority. The bottom line is that cultural heritage defines us as individuals and as a nation, and we need to work together. We need to roll up our sleeves, and we need to capture through the many partnerships that we have. Through all of these, we can continue to move forward the vision of the National Historic Preservation Act. So thank you for the opportunity for joining you, and I look forward to hearing the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Toothman, for giving us many important things to think about this morning. Before we move on to our next speaker, I wanted to recognize one of our distinguished guests. We have so many distinguished members of the community here today, but I noticed that the mayor was here. So Mayor Lee Posey, would you take a bow? We're glad to have you. The mayor is always someone we can count on to support our preservation efforts in the community. We appreciate your being here this morning. And now I want to welcome our last speaker this morning. As you know, Senator Landrieu couldn't be here. I was disappointed, as I'm sure all of you were, to find that out yesterday, but I was very pleased to know that she was sending her chief of staff to us today. We really appreciate that. It's a great opportunity to have really the #1 person on her staff to be here with us from Washington today. So I didn't have a lot of time to get to connect with Don Crivens before he came, but I did check online and realized he has had quite a distinguished career on the Hill in Washington. But also an interesting fact that some of you may not know is that he is a former member of the House of Representatives in the state of Louisiana, and that he and his father, who served in the Senate at the time, are the only father-son that have ever served together in the state house in Louisiana. So I think that's an interesting historical aspect as well. So Don, we're very glad to have you this morning. Mr. Crivens, if you come and join us now, we're glad to hear your thoughts.
Good morning. First of all, let's get the bad news out of the way. I'm so sorry and very disappointed as well that Senator Landrieu could not be here with you, because I know it meant a lot to many of you for her to be here this morning. And so on her behalf, and she and I spoke this morning, we spoke last night, she is sincerely sorry she couldn't be here today. She gave me such great stories about Laura and how important this meant to her and Laura meant to her and the work that Laura did. And so I want to just start my talk by telling you that again, that I am very, very deeply apologetic that she is not here. I am not apologetic that I am here. I'm glad to be here. And as I read about Laura's legacy last night and prepared for this, I am a man of faith. And then I started to question, maybe I was supposed to be here today. Because I think Laura's legacy shows that sometimes congressional staffers and many of you who work for the mayor or work maybe a little bit behind the scenes, sometimes we have an obligation, not sometimes, all the time, we have an obligation to do our part too. That we work for people who may be elected, we work for people who may be appointed, but we also have an obligation to fulfill our legacy, our obligation. We should leave a legacy as well. And so maybe that's why I'm supposed to be here today with my coworker and good friend, Tari Bradford, who many of you know works this area for our office. And although my card says Chief of Staff, I want you to know, if you know Tari is my boss. And she reminds me of that. But no, she's a great person to work with. And so I am not apologetic for being here today because I wanted to be here today. Now, I could have used the talking points that were written for the senator, and I'm not going to do that. I want to speak as Don Cravens. And Kirk mentioned a little bit about my history, but I grew up in Arnaville, Louisiana, and practiced law in Lafayette and the Opelousas area for many, many years, was elected to the Louisiana State Legislature in 2004 as a House of Representatives, a member of the House. Got a chance to serve in the Louisiana State Senate for a couple of years as well. Live in Opelousas, Louisiana, and got an opportunity to go and work for Mary as the staff director or the chief of staff of the Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship in Washington, D.C. And then I became her chief of staff about a year and a half ago. I tell you all of that to tell you that I think I can add to this discussion this morning as well. And I want to add to that discussion. Before I get started, I want to mention my dad is the mayor of Opelousas. And if you think the people in New Orleans have a complex about being the second oldest city, we in Louisiana being the third, we need therapy as well. But I'm very happy to be here, and I want to talk a little bit about what I think Senator Landrieu, where she is right now in her congressional career, why that's important. She gets the issue. She understands how important historic preservation, how important those issues are to the state of Louisiana, how important those issues are now as chairwoman of the Committee of Senate and Natural Resources, the committee that oversees and has jurisdiction over the National Park Service and the Department of Interior. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. She also understands, and I heard one of the presenters say, how important this issue is to all sides, to both sides of the aisle. We were very, very proud to work with Pam Breaux this year and really in the past couple of years on the poverty point issue. It was not a partisanship issue. We were very, very honored and happy to work with our Lieutenant Governor, who is a Republican, and Mary is a Democrat. We were happy because that issue didn't know partisanship. That issue didn't know conservative or liberal. That issue didn't know middle of the road. That was an issue that was good for everybody. And I want to ask, because the senator asked me to do this for you, Pam, let's just give Pam one more round of applause for all of her hard work. It was under her leadership, and she literally texted us when she went to Qatar, and when Poverty Point was named as a World Heritage Site, Pam was texting us to let us know about the vote. And so the senator was very appreciative about that, Pam, and I want to thank you. In October, she's going to be there with you celebrating that amazing feat. But like I said, I want to talk to you a little bit about the chair of her chairmanship. She's always been a supporter of these efforts, but now as the chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, she controls on your behalf, on our behalf as citizens of Louisiana, the authorizing jurisdiction for the Department of the Interior, including the National Park Service. Now, it's not a coincidence that we're talking about this lady, Laura, and Senator Johnston, and about Mary Landrieu, because it was 20 years ago that Senator Johnston was the chair of the same committee. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Laura was able to accomplish so many of the great things with your help here in Louisiana, and her boss happened to be the chair of the committee that had oversight on these very important entities. So I say that to say, ladies and gentlemen, think about it. We are at a very, very critical time in our state's history. It has taken 20 years for our senator, one of our senators, to now assume, again, the chair of a very, very important committee, one that everyone in this room should care about. Not just because we are big in oil and gas in this state, which is very critical to our infrastructure and our economy, but those of you in this room where preservation is important, that committee is just as important to you as it is to the young man who's offshore today. And you need to realize that, and I know you do, because as we said earlier, we're preaching to the crowd, but I just wanted to remind you about that. She's only been the chair for 7 months now, but one of the first things she was able to accomplish was the passing of the Lower Mississippi River National Park Study Bill out of the U.S. Senate. And that bill has left the Senate. We're hopeful that if the House of Representatives will take that bill up and send it to the President, it will direct the Secretary of the Interior to determine the suitability and feasibility of designating sites in Plaquemines Parish along the Lower Mississippi River area as part of the National Park System. She's also secured funding. I know that when we talk about earmarks and funding in today's society, those things can be a bad word. Well, my boss doesn't feel that way, because she knows that that's part of being a congressional member. That's part of being a United States Senator. Where appropriate, where feasible, when fiscally responsible, our members have a duty to appropriate funding for worthwhile projects. In 2009, she secured $1 million for the Conservation Fund in Natchitoches Parish for the Lower Cane River area of the Red River National Wildlife Refuge. These funds allowed the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to purchase 2,215 acres of land, completing the second and final phase of the acquisition of the Cane River Plantation. In 2006, she secured $25.5 million in federal dollars for cultural and historic projects in the Cane River region, including $2.85 million for the Cane River National Heritage Area Commission project. In 2004, she was, with your help, secured $1.1 million for the Magnolia Plantation at Cane River Creole National Park. And I'd be remiss if I did not mention the other shining gem located right here, where we are today, the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training. As you know, this center was established in 1992 as an amendment to the National Historic Preservation Act. The law even went so far as to state that the center be located right here in Natchitoches at this wonderful institution. And I said, that didn't happen by luck. It's because you had a senator and a legislative director who had the vision to make that happen, and he sat in the right place on Capitol Hill as chair of a committee, a powerful committee, to make that happen. Senator Landrieu does not only sit, she sits as the chair, but there's another position she holds in the United States Senate that a lot of people don't hear about. In addition to being the chair of the Energy Committee, she also sits on the Appropriations Committee. And on that committee, the members of that committee each chair subcommittees. And Senator Landrieu chairs the subcommittee on Homeland Security. And as a result of even that committee and the Appropriations Committee as a whole, she works every day to try to provide as many funding opportunities as she can in this tight fiscal budget for preservation. And so I want to talk a little bit about even some of those. She's provided, in 2005, she secured almost $2 million for the NCPTT. This funding would help the center to stimulate technology transfers from the academic and private sectors into the disciplines of archaeology, architecture, landscape, and museum conservation. And so those are all things that she's been able to do as a senator with seniority, and as she likes to say, with clout, your clout, because you have allowed her to serve for these past 3 terms. I want to leave you with my 2 cents. My 2 giveaways. Advocacy matters. Advocacy matters. We who staff senators and congressional men and women, we listen. That's why Tari and I are here today. This is advocacy, what you're doing today. This conversation with the senator, great. Equally as great is having that conversation with her chief of staff and her state director. Because we go back and we do the writing and the briefing and the calling. And so this is advocacy, and it matters. From the local level with the mayor, to the state level with the lieutenant governor's office and your state legislature, to the federal level. So every opportunity you have to educate people in government, people in positions that can help you with resources, please advocate. Please do. The second takeaway I want to give you is, I know the budget is tight, and I know we keep talking about how the funding for the fund is not always, it's not there. It is not there. That's a big takeaway for me. That's where my notes are here, right here, and Tari's notes. We're going to take that back to the boss, and I will promise you that she will work as hard, and we will work as hard as we can on a staff level to do everything we can to fully authorize the preservation fund. $150 million authorization, and you guys aren't even seeing a significant even piece of that. And so that's important. That's my takeaway from today. You got me. You got me. The money is probably not there in today's budget. It's there. I don't know that in Capitol Hill with the gridlock we've got going on right now that it gets done. But I'm going to work hard to see that it is, and I know Mary Landrieu is going to work hard to see that it is. But I don't want you to lose faith in it. And I don't want you to lose hope in it. Because that's what I feel a lot of people when I travel back home, and I've been traveling now for 2 weeks. I see people all across Louisiana, they lose faith and they lose hope in the system, and I don't want you to lose faith, and I don't want you to lose hope in the system. And what I want you to leave here with today is, we have 2 choices in Louisiana. You can keep fighting and fighting and fighting, and you know, when it comes, hope that we get our fair share, or we can keep fighting and fighting and fighting, and know that we'll get our fair share because we've elected people like Mary Landrieu who get it, and they're in positions as chair of the committee that oversees this to make it happen. And I wanted to leave that with you today. I hope that in 20 years or 30 years, when my children and your children and grandchildren do this again, that you'll see the picture of Laura and you'll refer kindly to Bennett and Laura. And then maybe you'll say, and there was also Landrieu and Cravens. Thank you very much.